On a freezing Monday night in central Belfast, just 5 days before Christmas in 2004, a nondescript white delivery van pulled into a narrow alleyway behind the headquarters of the Northern Bank. Over the course of 2 hours, 2 bank employees walked out of the rear doors, loaded wooden crates packed with £26.5 million in raw cash into the back of the vehicle, and watched it drive away into the city traffic. Not a single alarm had been tripped. Not a single weapon had been drawn on site, and not a single passerby realized that they had just witnessed the largest bank robbery in British history. When the police finally entered the vault late that night, they weren't looking at a traditional safe-cracking job or a daylight assault. They were looking at the precise execution of a terrifying tactical doctrine known as a tiger kidnapping. The criminals hadn't broken through the bank's steel-reinforced doors from the outside. They had forced the bank's own managers to open them from within by taking their families hostage at gunpoint 24 hours earlier. The mystery wasn't just how a gang managed to move over 2 tons of physical banknotes out of a high-security facility in broad daylight. The real question was who possessed the discipline, the intelligence capacity, and the absolute logistical control required to pull off an operation of this scale in one of the most heavily surveilled cities on Earth. The setup began 24 hours before the vault was cleared. On Sunday evening, 2 separate groups of armed men, wearing dark clothing and police disguise elements, struck simultaneously at 2 different locations miles apart. One team forced their way into the home of Kevin McMullen, a senior bank official living in Luffenisland, County Down, while a second unit raided the home of Chris Ward, a supervisor at Northern Bank's main headquarters in Polglas, West Belfast. In both locations, the entry was swift, cold, and coordinated to the minute. The raiders wore dark clothing, rubber masks, and carried handguns. But they didn't smash the doors or demand immediate cash. Instead, they took complete control. The gang did not act like chaotic intruders. They were calm, methodical, and chillingly professional. In Luffenisland, the bank's assistant head of cash operations, Kevin McMullen, and his wife Karen were informed that they were now part of a precision operation. In Polglas, bank supervisor Chris Ward was targeted simultaneously in his own home. Armed men dressed as police officers forced their way inside, binding his family and taking complete control of the household. Within minutes, 2 families living miles apart were converted into psychological collateral. The gang held all the cards, and they made sure both men understood the brutal calculus of the situation. If either employee failed to follow instructions to the letter, their loved ones would pay with their lives. On the morning of Monday, December 20th, 2 bank employees dressed in their standard business attire and departed for work under the invisible gunpoint of a meticulously coordinated paramilitary operation. Chris Ward and Kevin McMullen were instructed to act with absolute normality. They were to greet their colleagues, attend scheduled meetings, and manage the bank's end-of-year cash flow to anyone looking on. It was just another Monday at Donegall Square West. Bank tellers counted deposits, managers reviewed accounts, and security staff monitored the floor. But beneath the routine, an agonizing psychological clock was ticking. In McMullen's office and Ward's workspace, every phone call, every unexpected shadow, and every knock on the door carried the implicit threat that a mistake would result in the execution of their families. As the public doors locked at 5:00 p.m., the bank transitioned into a ghost town. Inside the subterranean vaults, Chris Ward and Chris McMullen were instructed to carry out the final stage of the plan. Under the intense gaze of security cameras, they began moving crates filled with cash from the cash handling center toward the rear exit on Wellington. The weight of £26.5 million in cash is not a conceptual figure. It is a physical mass weighing over half a ton. At approximately 6 o'clock, the first batch of notes was packed into sports bags and wheeled out through the rear exit onto Wellington Street. Waiting in the rain was a white box van, its engine idling, double-parked in plain view of evening commuters who assumed they were watching a routine lay-tower delivery. Ward loaded the vehicle under the strict instructions of his captors, knowing that miles away in Downpatrick and Polglas, a gunman still stood over his family, holding their lives in his hands. But the operation was far from complete. What the public, the police, and even the bank's senior executives did not realize in those chaotic hours was that Ward was forced to make not 1, but 2 trips back into the vaults. After the first load was safely driven away into the dark Belfast evening, Ward had to walk back inside, re-enter the high-security subterranean rooms, and haul out a second, massive payload of cash. By the time the white box van pulled away for the second time, the gang was transporting more than £26 million in hard currency, transforming a cold December night into the backdrop for one of the largest bank robberies in British and Irish history. Packed inside those plain wooden crates was over a ton of raw paper cash. It included Scottish banknotes, Bank of England sterling, euros, US dollars, and most critically, tens of millions of pounds in brand new, uncirculated northern banknotes that had never spent a single second in public hands. Back inside the subterranean vaults at Donegall Square West, the silence was deafening. The massive vault doors stood open, their shelves stripped bare in an operation executed with the cold efficiency of a military raid. But the crime scene was only half of the equation. Miles away, in the quiet residential pockets of Polglas and Downpatrick, the families of Chris Ward and Michael McMullen were still bound, terrified, and waiting for a signal that might never come. The hostage-takers had left explicit instructions. If anyone called the police before 11 o'clock that night, or if any attempt was made to trace the getaway vehicles, the families would pay with their lives. Ward and McMullen were trapped in an agonizing limbo, forced to balance the safety of their loved ones against the reality that a record-breaking heist had just been carried out under their names. It was not until close to midnight, after confirmational phone calls assured them that their loved ones had been dumped alive on cold, desolate roadsides, that Chris Ward and Karen McMullen finally felt safe enough to raise the alarm. Chris Ward's family had been dropped off in Polglas, a residential area on the southern outskirts of Belfast, shivering and profoundly shaken. Karen McMullen's partner was found tied up in a freezing, secluded patch of woodland near Kilcoo in County Down. Once the confirmation came through that the hostages were physically unharmed, the emergency response surged into motion. Shortly before midnight on December 20th, 2004, senior officers within the police service of Northern Ireland received the initial reports. When detectives stepped through the heavy security doors of the Northern Bank headquarters at Donegall Square West, they quickly realized they were not looking at a standard commercial robbery. They were looking at an administrative, logistical, and political disaster. The preliminary audit conducted in the dead of night was staggering. The gang had stripped the vault of £26.5 million sterling. Adjusted for foreign currency values and inflation, it stood as one of the largest cash heists in modern world history. Over £10 million of the stolen loot consisted of brand new, uncirculated Northern Bank banknotes that had never seen the light of day. Another £5.5 million was made up of used Northern Bank notes, alongside millions in legal tender issued by the Bank of England, foreign currencies, and usable cash reserves. To comprehend the sheer physical scale of the crime, investigators had to calculate the physical mass of the stolen material. Banknotes in those volumes do not fit into duffel bags or car trunks. The cash weighed well over half a ton. Transporting that volume of paper out of a heavily monitored, gated subterranean vault in the middle of a busy capital city required sophisticated logistics, structural knowledge, and an unwavering tactical discipline. The perpetrators had not relied on explosives, silent drills, or high-tech alarm bypasses. They relied on something far more dependable: human terror, executed with military synchronicity. On the evening of Sunday, December 19, two separate teams dressed as police officers simultaneously infiltrated the homes of two key Northern Bank employees. In Polglas, West Belfast, officials entered the home of junior supervisor Chris Ward. At the exact same hour, 30 miles away in Downpatrick, another armed gang breached the home of bank manager Kevin McMullen. The coordination was absolute. Both families were taken hostage, held at gunpoint through the night, and given explicit instructions that guaranteed total compliance. If either employee gave any indication of distress during their regular morning shift on Monday, December 20, their loved ones would pay with their lives. McMullen's wife was removed from her home in the dead of night, driven to an undisclosed rural location, and held in a freezing forest hut. The message sent to the two bank staff was unmistakable. They were not merely opening the vault. They were acting as the logistical conduit for an ongoing hostage operation. When Monday morning arrived, the two bank employees reported for duty at the Northern Bank headquarters in Donegall Square West as if it were any ordinary business day. They worked alongside colleagues who had no idea that a gun was metaphorically pointed at their heads. Throughout the afternoon, as normal financial activity swirled around them, Ward and McMullen were forced to carry out precise preparation tasks. They rearranged high-value pallets within the secure basement vault, preparing the cash for extraction. The operation was structured into two distinct tactical phases. At roughly 6 in the evening, as standard business hours concluded and Belfast city centre buzzed with holiday commuters, Ward moved a smaller portion of cash out to the street level through a staff exit. A man carrying a large sports bag waited in the alleyway. Ward handed over the bag containing roughly £1 million. This initial run was a live-fire stress test. The perpetrators were probing the immediate area for surveillance cover, police activity, or unexpected security friction. When the sports bag vanished into the city traffic without drawing suspicion, the green light was given for the primary payload. Hours later, long after the surrounding streets had cleared, a white box truck backed up to the bank's service entrance. Over the course of the next hour, bulk cash amounting to more than £25 million was systematically transferred into the vehicle. By late evening, the truck drove away into the night, vanishing effortlessly into the Belfast road network. It was only after a set delay, ensuring the getaway team was far beyond the initial dragnet, that the hostage teams relinquished control of the families and abandoned their positions. By midnight, when the alarm was finally raised and emergency responders swarmed the Belfast headquarters, detectives were left staring into a vault that looked less like a crime scene and more like a looted distribution center. The physical audacity of the haul was unprecedented in European criminal history. £26.5 million had evaporated in plain sight. But as forensic investigators began dusting the subterranean access points, they encountered a bewildering reality. The perpetrators had left virtually no forensic footprint. No DNA, no fingerprints, no discarded materials, and no erratic security camera feeds. Yet, as the Police Service of Northern Ireland launched Operation Stockholm, they quickly realized that the vast mountain of cash presented the thieves with a catastrophic structural flaw. Banknotes, unlike gold or diamonds, carry serial numbers and specific brand identities. Of the £26.5 million stolen, approximately £10 million consisted of brand new, uncirculated Northern banknotes, alongside £15 million in used paper and smaller amounts in other regional currencies. The paper mass was immense, but its sheer visibility made it an international radioactive hazard. In a desperate countermeasure designed to render the robbery financially useless, Northern Bank took an unprecedented step within 48 hours. They announced they were recalling and invalidating their entire issue of 10, 20, 50, and £100 banknotes. Overnight, tens of millions of pounds in cash turned into worthless pieces of decorated paper unless the holders could inject it back into the legal banking system before the deadline expired. The thieves had pulled off the perfect tactical extraction, only to find that their prized target had been transformed into a mountain of toxic waste. This move forced the perpetrators to pivot rapidly from tactical logistics to aggressive, international money laundering. But as police forces across the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland waited for the cash to surface in normal retail channels, the first physical recovery of stolen money occurred in a location so absurd it stunned the entire investigative team. In February 2005, barely 2 months after the heist, police raided the Garnerville Athletic Association Club in East Belfast, a private sports club exclusively used by active and retired officers of the Police Service of Northern Ireland. Hidden inside a toilet cistern in the sports complex, officers recovered a bag containing £175,000 in pristine Northern banknotes. The discovery sent shockwaves through the law enforcement command structure. Was it a blatant attempt by the robbers to mock the police force? Was it a sophisticated disinformation tactic designed to imply insider law enforcement involvement? Or was a police insider actively participating in the distribution of the money? While the Garnerville discovery consumed local headlines, high-level intelligence agencies were following a far broader trail that stretched well beyond Northern Ireland. Chief Constable Sir Hugh Ord held a press conference that shattered the delicate political atmosphere of the region. He stated unequivocally that the Police Service of Northern Ireland, backed by intelligence from the British Security Service MI5 and the